When I walked into that boardroom carrying a stack of presentation materials and wearing a simple black dress, they didn't even look up. One of them whispered to his colleague, "She's probably the intern bringing coffee." Another one glanced at me and said, "Sweetheart, the supplies are in the cabinet down the hall." They had absolutely no idea that I was about to present the strategy that would save their failing company, or that in 30 minutes their CEO would walk in and tell them I was the one they should have been listening to all along. My name is Celeste, and I've learned that sometimes the biggest advantage you can have in business is being completely underestimated by everyone in the room. But let me start from the beginning, because this story isn't just about a single meeting. It's about what happens when you're 26 years old, brilliant at what you do, and constantly mistaken for someone's assistant instead of someone's boss. I've been working in corporate consulting for 4 years, specializing in operational turnarounds for mid-sized companies in crisis. It's the kind of work that requires understanding complex financial structures, analyzing workflow inefficiencies, and developing comprehensive strategies that can save businesses from bankruptcy. It's also the kind of work that most people assume is done by 50-year-old men in expensive suits, not young women who shop in the junior section and still get carded at restaurants. For the past 8 months, I'd been working as the lead consultant on the biggest project of my career, rescuing Paramount Industries, a manufacturing company that had been hemorrhaging money for 3 years and was 6 months away from complete collapse. When I started the engagement, they had $17 million in debt, a workforce that hadn't received raises in 2 years, and production processes that were so inefficient, they were literally losing money on every product they made. The company had tried everything. They'd hired 3 different consulting firms, replaced their entire executive team twice, and implemented so many new systems that employees couldn't keep track of which processes they were supposed to be following. Nothing worked. Revenue kept falling, costs kept rising, and bankruptcy looked inevitable. That's when Stratton Consulting, my firm, got the call. Paramount's CEO, Harrison Blackwell, was willing to try one last solution before admitting defeat. He wanted a complete operational analysis and a turnaround strategy that could be implemented immediately. The project was worth $400,000 to our firm, and success would mean the difference between Paramount's survival and the loss of 800 jobs. My managing partner, Tobias Whitfield, assigned the project to me, not because he had particular faith in my abilities, but because every senior consultant was already committed to other accounts, and Paramount was considered such a long shot that he didn't want to waste anyone important on it. "Celeste," he told me during our project kickoff meeting, "I'm going to be honest with you. This is probably a career-limiting assignment. Paramount has defeated some of the best consulting minds in the industry. If you can't turn them around, nobody will blame you. But if you somehow pull off a miracle, it'll be the making of your reputation." I spent the next 6 months practically living at Paramount's facility. I analyzed every department, interviewed hundreds of employees, reviewed years of financial data, and identified dozens of operational problems that previous consultants had either missed or failed to address properly. The issues were complex and interconnected. Their procurement process was adding 30% to raw material costs. Their production scheduling was creating massive inefficiencies that required overtime labor to meet basic deadlines. Their quality control system was catching defects too late in the process, resulting in expensive rework and customer complaints. Their inventory management was tying up millions of dollars in products that couldn't be sold quickly enough to maintain cash flow. But the biggest problem was that nobody was looking at these issues as part of a unified system. Every previous consultant had focused on individual departments or specific processes, implementing isolated solutions that often made other problems worse. What Paramount needed wasn't more consultants or more systems. They needed someone who could see the big picture and design integrated solutions that addressed root causes instead of symptoms. Over 6 months, I developed a comprehensive turnaround strategy that would restructure their procurement, redesign their production processes, implement new quality controls, and optimize their inventory management. The plan was aggressive but achievable, and my financial projections showed it could save the company within 18 months while increasing profitability by 43%. But creating the strategy was only half the battle. The other half was convincing Paramount's board of directors to approve a plan developed by someone they had never heard of, from a consulting firm they had hired as a last resort. That's how I ended up walking into a boardroom full of executives who thought I was the intern. The presentation was scheduled for 10 a.m. on a Tuesday in November. Harrison Blackwell had arranged for me to present my turnaround strategy to Paramount's entire board of directors, plus key executives from their parent company, Meridian Capital. 12 people total, representing hundreds of millions in investment capital and the future of 800 jobs. I arrived 15 minutes early, as I always do, carrying my presentation materials and laptop in a leather portfolio that had cost me 3 weeks of savings, but looked appropriately professional. I was wearing a black dress with a structured blazer, conservative heels, and minimal jewelry, an outfit I had specifically chosen to project competence and authority. The boardroom was already occupied when I arrived. 8 men in expensive suits were seated around a mahogany conference table, reviewing documents and having quiet conversations about quarterly projections and market conditions. They looked up when I entered, but none of them stood or introduced themselves. "Excuse me," said one of them, a silver-haired man in his 60s who was clearly accustomed to being the most important person in any room. "Are you here to set up the presentation equipment?" "I'm here for the 10 o'clock presentation," I said, setting my materials on the table. "Oh," said another man, younger but equally dismissive. "Are you from the catering company? We didn't order refreshments, but if you have coffee." I looked around the table at faces that ranged from politely confused to mildly annoyed. None of them had any idea who I was or why I was there. "I'm Celeste Monroe from Stratton Consulting," I said clearly. "I'm here to present the operational turnaround strategy for Paramount Industries." The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Several of the men exchanged glances. One of them checked his watch. Another shuffled through his papers as if looking for an agenda that would explain my presence. "I think there's been some confusion," said the silver-haired man, who I later learned was Richard Pemberton, chairman of Meridian Capital's board. "We're expecting a presentation from Stratton Consulting, but Harrison told us we'd be meeting with their lead consultant." "That's me," I said. More uncomfortable silence. More exchanged glances. "How old are you?" asked another board member. 26, I replied. "And how long have you been with Stratton?" 4 years. 4 years, he repeated, as if I had said 4 days. "And they sent you to present a $400,000 turnaround strategy to save a $90 million company?" "They sent me to present the strategy I developed," I said. "Would you like me to get started? Or are you waiting for additional attendees?" Richard Pemberton looked at his watch again. "Harrison is running late, but let's begin. I'm sure this will be educational." I connected my laptop to the projection system and began my presentation. For the first 10 minutes, I had their attention. I outlined Paramount's current situation, reviewed the challenges that had led to their financial crisis, and explained why previous turnaround attempts had failed. But as I moved into the technical aspects of my strategy, the detailed operational changes, the financial projections, the implementation timeline, I could see them losing interest. They started checking their phones, having side conversations, and looking at me with expressions that clearly communicated their skepticism about both my age and my expertise. "Excuse me," interrupted a man I later learned was Douglas Fairfield, Paramount's board treasurer. "This procurement restructuring you're proposing, have you actually negotiated supplier contracts before?" "Yes, I have," I said. "I've managed procurement optimization for 6 different clients over the past 3 years. But have you personally negotiated contracts worth millions of dollars?" "I've been part of negotiating teams that have restructured supplier relationships worth over $50 million in aggregate." "Part of teams," he repeated, emphasizing the words. "So you weren't the lead negotiator?" I kept my voice steady. "In most cases, I developed the negotiation strategy and participated in the implementation." "I see," Douglas said, in a tone that suggested he saw exactly what he expected to see. "And this production scheduling system you're recommending, is this something you've implemented before?" "I've implemented similar systems at comparable manufacturing facilities." "Similar systems at comparable facilities," repeated another board member. "But nothing exactly like what Paramount needs?" "Every implementation is customized to the specific requirements of the client," I said. "That's why this strategy is designed specifically for Paramount's operational structure and market position." They weren't hostile exactly. They were just clearly unconvinced that someone my age could have developed solutions to problems that had defeated more experienced consultants. Every question was phrased to highlight my youth, my relative inexperience, or the theoretical nature of my recommendations. 20 minutes into my presentation, Richard Pemberton interrupted me again. "Celeste, this is all very impressive work, but I have to ask, where is the senior consultant who supervised this project? Shouldn't we be hearing from someone with more extensive experience in corporate turnarounds?" "I am the lead consultant on this project," I said. "This strategy was developed under my direction, based on my analysis, using methodologies I've refined over 4 years of turnaround work. But surely someone senior reviewed your work, someone with gray hair and a few decades of experience?" Before I could answer, another board member spoke up. "Richard, maybe we should wait for Harrison before making any decisions. He can explain how Stratton typically structures these engagements." "That's probably wise," agreed Douglas. "In the meantime, Celeste, maybe you could tell us about some of your successful projects? Companies where your strategies actually worked?" I spent the next 15 minutes describing my track record, but I could see that nothing I said was convincing them. They wanted to hear about 20-year consulting veterans, not someone who had graduated from business school 4 years ago. They wanted war stories from economic downturns and market crashes, not case studies from someone who had started her career during a period of economic growth. The door opened at 10:45, and Harrison Blackwell walked in with 2 other executives I didn't recognize. Harrison was in his early 50s, with the kind of confident presence that immediately commanded attention from everyone in the room. "Gentlemen, sorry I'm late," he said, taking his seat at the head of the table. "I hope you've had a chance to hear from our consultant. Celeste, how's the presentation going?" Richard Pemberton cleared his throat. "Harrison, we need to discuss the structure of this engagement. We were expecting to meet with a senior consultant, someone with the experience necessary to handle a project of this magnitude." Harrison looked confused. "You are meeting with the senior consultant." "This young lady is very bright," Douglas said carefully, "but we have concerns about whether someone with her limited experience can develop solutions for problems that have stumped much more seasoned professionals." Harrison looked around the table, then at me, then back at the board members. I could see him processing what had happened during his absence. "Gentlemen," he said slowly, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. Let me be very clear about something." He stood up and walked over to where I was standing near the presentation screen. "Celeste Monroe is not just any consultant. She is the single most gifted operational strategist I have encountered in 25 years of business. Over the past 6 months, she has identified problems in our operations that 3 previous consulting firms missed completely. She has developed solutions that are more innovative, more practical, and more comprehensive than anything we've seen from consultants with twice her experience." The room had gone completely silent. Every board member was staring at Harrison, then at me, then back at Harrison. "Furthermore," he continued, "the turnaround strategy she's presenting today represents 6 months of the most thorough analytical work I've ever seen. She didn't just identify our problems. She understood how they interconnected, why they persisted, and how to solve them systematically." He looked directly at Richard Pemberton. "Richard, when I recommended that Meridian Capital approve this consulting engagement, it was specifically because I wanted Celeste Monroe working on our problems. Not her supervisor, not some gray-haired veteran, but her, because she is the one with the expertise we need." Harrison sat back down and gestured toward me. "Now, if you're done questioning her credentials, I'd suggest you listen to what she has to say. Because if you don't approve her strategy, Paramount Industries will be bankrupt within 6 months, and 800 people will lose their jobs." The transformation in the room was immediate and complete. Suddenly, every board member was sitting up straighter, taking notes, asking detailed questions about implementation timelines and resource requirements. The dismissive attitudes and condescending questions disappeared, replaced by the kind of focused attention that my expertise had deserved from the beginning. I finished my presentation without further interruption. When I concluded with my financial projections, showing how the strategy would eliminate Paramount's debt within 18 months, while increasing profitability by 43%, the room erupted in questions. But these were serious, substantive questions about execution details and risk mitigation, not skeptical challenges to my competence. "Celeste," Richard Pemberton said when I finished answering their questions, "this is extraordinary work. The level of analysis, The integration of solutions, the financial modeling, it's exactly what Paramount needs. Douglas Fairfield nodded enthusiastically. The procurement restructuring alone could save us millions. And the production scheduling optimization is brilliant. I can't believe nobody thought of this approach before. Because nobody looked at the system holistically, I said. Every previous consultant focused on individual problems instead of understanding how they affected each other. Well, said Harrison, what's the board's decision? Richard looked around the table, but the outcome was obvious. Unanimous approval, he said. When can we start implementation? Immediately, I said. I've already identified the key personnel for the implementation team, and I've prepared detailed timelines for each phase of the restructuring. After the board members left, Harrison asked me to stay behind for a private conversation. Celeste, he said, I owe you an apology. I should have introduced you properly when I arranged this meeting. I should have made sure they understood exactly who you are and what you've accomplished. It's fine, I said. I'm used to it. It shouldn't be fine, he replied. And you shouldn't have to be used to it. What happened in the first half of this meeting was unacceptable. He was right, of course. But I had learned long ago that being angry about underestimation was less productive than being prepared to prove people wrong. Harrison, I said, I've been underestimated my entire career. In college, professors assumed I was majoring in communications or psychology instead of finance and operations. In my first job, clients asked to speak to my supervisor when I called with technical questions. At conferences, other consultants assume I'm someone's assistant instead of their colleague. I gathered my presentation materials and put them back in my portfolio. But here's what I've learned. Being underestimated is actually an advantage. People don't see you coming. They don't prepare for your expertise. They don't guard against your insights. And when you prove them wrong, the impact is 10 times more powerful than if they had expected competence from the beginning. Harrison nodded slowly. That's a remarkably mature perspective. It's a survival strategy, I said. In a profession dominated by middle-aged men, I can either spend my energy fighting perceptions, or I can use those perceptions to my advantage. 6 months later, Paramount Industries was not only solvent, but profitable. The operational changes I designed had exceeded my own projections, reducing costs by 38% and increasing production efficiency by 52%. The company had paid off $6 million in debt, reinstated employee raises, and was considering expansion into new markets. The success of the Paramount turnaround established my reputation in the consulting industry. I was promoted to senior partner at Stratton, made the youngest person ever to appear on Consulting Magazine's Rising Stars list, and started receiving speaking invitations from business schools and professional conferences. But the most satisfying part of the entire experience happened 3 months after the board presentation, when I received a LinkedIn message from Douglas Fairfield. Celeste, he wrote, I wanted to reach out and apologize for my behavior during your presentation to the Paramount board. My questions were inappropriate and reflected unconscious biases that I'm embarrassed to acknowledge. Your strategy has saved our company, and your expertise far exceeded anything I had a right to expect. I hope you'll accept my apology and consider me an advocate for your future success. Similar messages came from 3 other board members, each acknowledging that their initial skepticism had been unfounded and unprofessional. Richard Pemberton invited me to present at Meridian Capital's annual investor meeting, describing me as one of the most impressive consultants he'd ever worked with. The story of that boardroom presentation has become something of a legend in consulting circles. It's been shared as an example of unconscious bias, the importance of giving young professionals opportunities to prove themselves, and the value of looking beyond surface appearances to recognize actual competence. But for me, it represents something simpler. The moment I realized that being underestimated wasn't a disadvantage I had to overcome, but an advantage I could leverage. When people assume you don't belong in the room, they don't see you as a threat. When they assume you don't have answers, they don't prepare counter-arguments. And when you prove them wrong, the reversal of expectations creates a credibility that's actually more powerful than if they had respected you from the beginning. 2 years later, I left Stratton to start my own consulting firm. Monroe Operational Solutions now employs 15 consultants, specializes in corporate turnarounds, and has successfully rescued over 30 companies from bankruptcy. Our client list includes some of the most respected names in manufacturing, technology, and healthcare. I'm still the youngest person in most of the rooms I enter. I still get mistaken for someone's assistant at professional conferences. I still have to prove my expertise to skeptical clients who expected someone older, more traditional, more aligned with their preconceptions about what competence looks like. But I've learned to see these moments not as obstacles, but as opportunities. Because there's nothing more satisfying than walking into a room where nobody expects you to have answers, and walking out having solved problems that defeated everyone who came before you. Sometimes the biggest advantage in business is being exactly who people don't expect you to be. And sometimes, the most powerful moment in your career is when someone in authority looks around a room full of skeptics and says, "Actually, she's the one in charge here." That boardroom in November taught me that competence speaks louder than assumptions, expertise matters more than appearances, and the most effective way to handle underestimation is not to fight it, but to use it as fuel for proving everyone wrong. I still have the business card that Richard Pemberton handed me after that meeting. On the back, he had written, "Never let anyone make you feel like you don't belong in the room. You're the smartest person most of us will ever work with." I keep it in my wallet as a reminder that sometimes the people who underestimate you today become your biggest advocates tomorrow. All you have to do is show them what you're really capable of.